Long time no see. I just want to let you guys know what's going on. I have such a hard time recording nowadays because when I get in the heat of the moment and the endorphins are flowing, last thing I want to do is stop and turn on cameras and sync everything. So it's really hard for me. So that first clip that you saw was just me going, I got to force myself, turn the cameras on and just started playing. And I always say, yeah, you know, I hate playing cold. I need to warm up with my arthritis, and people are surprised that I have arthritis, but here are my hands. You can see that this finger is one of the worst ones. And compared to a normal finger, that thing's been like that for years. And then this finger doesn't bend all the way, which really makes me mad. See? But and then I've got these knots on there that my grandparents used to have. Now I'm getting them. Either way, it takes me about an hour to where I feel like, you know, my fingers are flexible again. But when this thing starts hurting, it really does affect the bends and stuff, because the bends seem to stress it out a little bit. So let me explain what's going on. Remember, we were going to do Machine Gun, and there's so many versions from 10 to 22 minutes long. So I put that on the back burner for now, and Hear My Train of Comin's always one of my favorite songs to play. So I'm going to delve into that song a little more detailed, show you a little bit how to play it, show you some of my favorite licks, which he's got some cool ones in there where he does some E, A, and D bending. Well, mostly the E string, the big bass E, which I think is so cool because most people don't do that. And that's probably helps when you have a 38 E. I wanted to show you my rig. It's changed a little bit over the last few months. Some of you might know that I got a real early 70s Univibe, and I love it to death. And it's just, the preamp sounds so good, and that really was one of Jimmy's secrets, because if he had that Univibe on stage, he was going through that preamp, and it just really fattens up your tone. And so I'm only using 1, 2, 3, 4 effects. I'll show you those here in a second. Most of the time there's only 2 or 3 on, so I try to keep it simple. Now I notice, you know, with Jimmy's signal, I mean, he's playing the same brightness and everything, but it's those long coily chords that cuts down on the highs. It really gives him some more fatness. So it's hard to emulate that with, you know, today's gear with all the great cables and all this stuff. You end up with some brightness. So in that particular clip in the beginning, I was using my Super Trim preamp, which I'll put a link to that video in the description on how I set it up as a preamp. I just had a subscriber contact me and said he just picked one up, set it up like I showed him in that video, and he loves it. And it really is versatile. And we both discovered, I discovered it a couple of months ago, there's a rate and a mix knob on the top. I'll show it to you here in a second. And when you have it just set up for preamp, the mix knob is like a blending knob. You can go from super clean to no effect to almost, you know, overdrive distortion. It's crazy. So I've got it somewhere around 1 o'clock or so. Just a little bit of boost. Then I go right into my Dennis Cornell replica fuzz face with AC-128 germanium transistors, and I think that's key for you guys when it comes to cleaning up your tone. I've yet to find a silicone fuzz that actually cleans up that well with your guitar volume. But in that video, all I have to do is use my guitar volume. I can go from clean to that little bit of distortion at the end, and I didn't even crank it up as high as I usually do. But the germanium is about the only way you can do that. And then I go into a treble boost, which is the Area 51 Alienist, which is a little bit overkill. I think it's got like 7 different channels that you can switch, which just switches capacitors. You can go from kind of trebly to bassy. And I've got it about on, let's say 1 is bass and 8 or 7 is treble. I've got it around 3, closer to the bass side. Then I go from that to my wah-wah, and then from the wah-wah to the Univibe, then the Univibe to the OCD, the full-tone OCD version 1.4, and then to my amp switcher. But right now I'm only using my 1960 Tweed Bassman. But that's it. I'll go through it here in just a second. And then you got to figure out what it's going to sound like on the recording. So after I recorded that first clip, I said, man, I could have probably used a little bit of brightness. So in that case, I would turn off the OCD, turn on the treble boost, but it has a lot of hiss and my cameras pick up a lot of it. It also exaggerates the reverb for some reason. I get the weirdest interactions with pedals, and some of you guys might too, but the reason I'm telling you that is so you mix and match them. You know, this is very unconventional. Just don't go by any rules. Put your pedals in the order that sound the best, and it takes a lot of, you know, switching and flipping and experimenting and everything. But I mean, most people would say this is not going to work for Hendrix. It's the only thing I can get that works and sounds good. The wah-wah sounds great, which I will put a little bit of that in the following video, which will be the tutorial, and then some of my favorite licks, because I'm not going to do the whole song. I'll show you my rig. Oh, and this is another interesting thing. Since I'm playing a left-handed Strat, I found these old Switchcraft cables that they swear are made like the old days. And I thought, well, why don't I do that? Because I needed a soft, small cable for my left-handed Strat so it doesn't get in the way, you know? Like Jimi had, you know, so it's very soft, doesn't hit your arm or anything. And it actually is a great sounding, cheap cable. And sorry, but I can't remember where I found it, but just Google Switchcraft vintage cables or something like that, and you'll end up with this. It's got a 90 degree on the other side. So here's the Super Trim. It's not set up for a tremolo. It just has the preamp. Even though it's blinking here, there's no, tremolo effect. Have it on. This is the mix knob that I was telling you about. You can turn this counterclockwise and it will really add some distortion. So you can really fine tune it with that. This is my Dennis Cornell AC 128. Sounds great. I had kept it in the box for a couple of years, didn't really care for it. But then in this situation with the Univibe, I thought, well, let me give it another try, and it worked out perfectly. That's the Alienist treble boost. The way I've got it set up, both toggles are to the left. That's all I'd use it for, just that one setting. And I play with the volume a little bit. Going into my Detrick FX wah-wah pedal, which is the best wah-wah I've ever had. Some of my friends bought them, and I hope they still love them, because I do. Sounds amazing. And then my pride and joy now, the old Univibe. And you can see I've got it set. The volume's not completely cranked, and the intensity is, what is that, 8, 9. And then the speed pedal's over here in cancel mode. It's all the way back. And Stevie uses his Univibe in that Hear My Train a Comin', so I might try to get some of those in there. Then I go straight from the Univibe to the OCD, and then I rarely use the MXR carbon copy. And then my favorite amp switcher of all time, which sadly they don't make anymore, 3-banger. I could actually run 4 amps out of this thing if I use the tuner out, but the tuner out wouldn't have a switch on it. But I've got my Super Reverb connected to B, and I've got my 1960 Bassman connected to A. Then just my Peterson strobe tuner, which I highly recommend. Those things are very accurate. You notice here, for me to match that song, I actually call this, you know, there was a kind of a myth that Jimmy always tuned to A432. But I had to sit there and play with it. I don't know, my ears are getting weird nowadays. I had it at 435 for a while. You can see the bottom is the actual setting. And this is just the name I gave that particular tuning. So I kept playing with it, and it's just a little bit flat of A440. But he's tuned to E, but just a little flat. And that's why that song kind of sounds different on that Voodoo Child compilation album. So that's it. I'm still here. I hope to get this done. You know, the holidays are coming up, and I've got to get everything knocked out before family comes. I've got guests coming around in a couple weeks, actually. So I gotta get cranking. So just bear with me. I'm a little slow nowadays, but I'll get some stuff done. Thanks for subscribing. Please subscribe, hit the bell, get notifications, all the good stuff that everybody tells you, because it helps me. I'll talk to you guys later.